This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
What's up, jerks?
Manning retired.
Which one?
Both.
I like kickers.
Put him on the board. Hausch Mazzoli. Got it. Championship.
What's up, everybody? It's another episode of the Fantasy Nerds on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. I am your host, as always, Jason Jarvi. Follow me on Twitter at Jarvi the King. We're another week closer to week one of real football. We've been watching the preseason football as we've seen, and you've seen all the backups play. You haven't seen a ton out of starters. Probably the one bright spot you might have seen is Leonard Fournette. He came out and made some comments about how the NFL is actually not that hard and that it's just about as hard as he played in the SEC, which I think he's going to get a rude awakening. I think once he gets into the regular season, you're playing 16 full games, you're playing against the best players in the country. It's going to wear on him. So we'll see about that. So I'm going to dive into some fantasy news this week, and I'm going to go down my top running backs this year going into fantasy football. But I want to start talking about drafts. And I've already detailed drafts in other episodes, but I'm going to actually detail my biggest pet peeve about fantasy drafts. And that is trying to get everybody together for one single night. Now, if you are in a dedicated fantasy league where everybody's all set to go, and you shouldn't have a problem then to, finalize a date, get everybody together, and just pick it, whether you're doing it online or whether you're doing it in person. It doesn't really matter. But having everybody there, whether it's a 10-team league, whether it's a 12-team league, getting everyone together, if everyone's dedicated, you shouldn't have a problem. But more often than not, because fantasy football, it's a game, and a lot of people do it for fun, it's so hard to just finalize one date. And more often than not, you end up having at least one or two guys who can't make drafts. Whether, I know in the Slackjaw League that we've been doing for years and years, we always seem to have one guy who's either going to the circus with his kids or he forgot that he planned a trip to Italy, and so he's not going to be able to make the draft. So then it becomes a whole big thing of having one of the other guys in the league draft for him at that point. And I've run into this same situation this year in the Dynasty League that I'm trying to get started. It may have started a little bit late, but I threw out the dates about a week ago. I gave him a 2.5 week window of when we should probably try and get drafted. And it was right before the season was the end, and then probably towards the beginning of the fourth preseason week. And it slowly, as people started giving their replies, it's just trying to get 10 people's schedules together. Even if you are dedicated, it's tough, and I understand. So it ended up we threw a Hail Mary. We got everybody together for a live in-person auction draft, because that's the big thing with the Dynasty League is when you're just starting out, you really do need to do an auction draft, because if you're going to be having guys for 5, 6, 7 years, it wants to be fair. And if you're doing a snake draft, you automatically miss out on the top guys if you end up with, picks 7 through 10. So an auction draft, it makes it fair, and it lets you shape the team the way you want to do it. And really, that's how it is if you aren't at draft, whether it's auction, whether it's a snake draft. If you're not at draft, you don't have final control over your team. So then if you do have a bad season, you can blame it on, I wasn't at draft, I didn't get to pick my team and got stuck. Or conversely, if you actually do good, you take all the credit, and other people are salty about that. I know we've had in the Slackjaw League where we've had guys draft for them, and they ended up making it in the playoffs. I don't think they've actually won a championship. on a team that they didn't draft, but they made it pretty far. So my advice, get together early, plan well ahead, and have your draft date available, and make sure that you can get everybody there. So that wraps up my little diatribe about your fantasy drafts. And let's dive into fantasy news right now. And we got some quarterback controversies to start out the conversation. The Tyrod Taylor, the quarterback in Buffalo, there was some concern about if the starting job is safe for him, but they have assured them that he is going to be the starting quarterback. Now, I'm not sure how much Tyrod Taylor is really going to factor into normal leagues. He might be a backup or a bye week fill-in, and especially with no Sammy Watkins anymore and with Jordan Matthews, you're not sure how long he's going to be out with his the cracked sternum. And they're going to go to the running back anyways enough with LeSean McCoy. So Tyrod Taylor, he's going to be a quarterback. Not sure what he's actually going to do. You probably should avoid him. There's probably going to be other quarterbacks I would rather take a risk on over Tyrod Taylor at this point if he's going to be my backup quarterback. Another quarterback situation to look at, it may not concern him starting in your leagues, but what it's going to affect the players around him is where it's really going to affect fantasy players. So in the Jacksonville Jaguars, Blake Bortles, he was the 3rd overall pick when he got drafted, and it's really just turning out that he may not have what it takes to be a franchise player in the NFL. So the coach came out, said that the quarterback position is really, it's up for grabs at this point, and it's between Blake Bortles and Chad Henne of all people, who I thought he was retired, but apparently he is still on the team. He's still getting a paycheck. Good for him, but it's definitely going to affect those other Jacksonville Jaguars. It's immediately going to affect Allen Robinson, who was a highly touted wide receiver last year. He was coming off of a big season, and he ended up having a down season last year. I mean, it wasn't all the quarterback play, but it definitely is a major factor. If you got a good quarterback throwing it to you, you're obviously going to be a little bit better. So that quarterback battle is really going to affect how Allen Robinson plays, and it is going to affect how Leonard Fournette really goes. You know, I mentioned at the top of the show that he's finding the NFL just easy. Well, he's not going to find the game easy when teams know that the quarterback can't throw the ball, and they know that they're going to give the ball to Leonard Fournette 25 to 30 times a game. They're just going to stack 8 guys in the box. So that is a major concern for anybody who wants to, pin their hopes on a guy like Leonard Fournette or Allen Robinson high in drafts. So be mindful when you're drafting those players that it could be tough sledding for them this year. In Miami, Jay Cutler, he just had his first preseason game. He didn't play too much. He took a big hit, was able to get up. I'm not talking about Jay Cutler, though, but after the game, he was talking about his wide receiver, Devante Parker, and said that he's actually just like a faster Alshon Jeffrey. Alshon Jeffrey, he was the wide receiver when he was in Chicago. Now, it's pretty high praise for a guy like Devante Parker, who hasn't been the greatest, but he definitely, this could be a season where he truly breaks out. So it'll be interesting to see how that relationship develops, and if Jay Cutler can really start hooking up with Devontae Booker in games, Devontae Booker could really skyrocket into a high-level wide receiver 2 and maybe even a wide receiver 1. Tampa Bay Buccaneers running back Doug Martin is looking good in preseason practice and in games, but his roster spot might actually be in jeopardy. He's had some down years. They got Jaquiz Rodgers on their team, and don't forget Doug Martin is actually sitting out the first 3 games of the season with a suspension. So it's really going to be, it's something to watch, because if you're going to be having to rely on Doug Martin to be a running back 2, he could really break your roster, because I know from experience, when you have a guy, and if your running back 1 is already shaky and you're relying on your running back 2 to really pick up that slack, and that guy goes down, it can ruin entire fantasy seasons. So be careful drafting Doug Martin. If you do, I highly suggest trying to get your Quiz Rogers as well. Another running back in Seattle, Thomas Rawls, again dealing with a quotation mark minor ankle injury. And this is just sending red flags all over the place for me because Thomas Rawls just seems like a guy who's always going to be dealing with an injury, and you're never sure if he's going to play, if he's not going to play. So he drops way down in my rankings just because you never know what you're going to get for him. And this creates a spot for Eddie Lacy. The Seahawks went out, picked him up in free agency. I think this is really the reason why they went out and got him, because Eddie Lacy he's not that far removed from being a very good running back in Green Bay, and it seems like he has his weight issues down. They had all the offseason reports that he was getting bonuses for losing weight, which was ridiculous. But if Eddie Lacy is slimmer, if he's ready to be a full-time running back again, I think he's a very, very good fit for the Seattle Seahawks. He reminds me, he's a runner just like Marshawn Lynch. He's going to grind it right up the middle, and that's, I think, what the Seahawks were missing last year when Russell Wilson really had to do everything on his own. He didn't get a lot of help from the running backs because of injuries. So I would be very wary of Thomas Rawls, but keep an eye on Eddie Lacy, and he could be a guy later in maybe the middle rounds that he could be one of the steals of the draft. Wide receiver Martavis Bryant on the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's doing everything right so far. He missed all of last season because he can't, stay off the weed. And it's looking like he's getting closer to he has the conditional reinstatement. He may get full reinstatement by the time week 1 rolls around. And if he is, he's right there. He's wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 1 possibility. So be mindful of him. I wouldn't draft him too high unless you're willing to take the risk of him not, playing a couple games or maybe even not getting reinstated, or the possibility that he falls back into his old ways. You've seen it with Josh Gordon. You've seen it with a bunch of guys that they just have a hard time with this stuff and in getting back into the league. So Martavis Bryant he's a high-risk player, but an extremely high reward. Another Pittsburgh Steeler to talk about, obviously one of the top picks in this year's draft, Le'Veon Bell. He's still holding out. He's not signed his franchise tag yet. And I mean, they're at the point where they legally can't do a deal for him at this point. He has to sign the franchise tender or sit out the entire year. And even though he's losing money and he's getting fined every day he's not there, he can go in pretty much right before the beginning of the season, sign the tender, and he's going to make his $12 million. So it is a concern because we see time and time again when players sit out preseason and they don't really get up to game speed, that in those first couple weeks you either deal with them having a little bit of growing pains getting into the everyday life of football again. And then also at times you see them get hurt a lot of times just because they don't have that conditioning. And I trust that Le'Veon Bell is doing everything in his power during the offseason to stay healthy, to stay as ready as he can without, going through full practices with his team. But it's definitely a concern. And for a guy who's going in the top, 1, 2, 3 picks in most fantasy drafts, it's a real red flag. It's not enough where I'm not going to draft him. Like if I have the 3rd pick and for whatever reason Le'Veon Bell comes to me at number 3, I would be very, very hard pressed to not take him at that point because of how good he is. And outside of, Adrian Peterson a couple years, I think if there's any guy who can come in and immediately just get to work and get it done, I think Le'Veon Bell is that guy. So it doesn't change. I think if he was in preseason and practices all along, I think he would be hands down the number 1 guy, because it's really the top two running backs. It's between Le'Veon Bell and David Johnson, and I'll get into it when I detail my running back rankings in a little bit. But it's between those guys. But I think a fully prepared Le'Veon Bell is probably better suited to succeed and score you more fantasy points than David Johnson. Moving on, last bit of fantasy news, and it's the news. I didn't talk about it last week. The information pretty much came out right after I released the episode, and that's about Dallas Cowboys running back Ezekiel Elliott. Got suspended for 6 games. Now, the appeal is in the process. The NFLPA, they filed it, and they're supposed to have the hearing on August 29th. So it's going to be before the season starts, and we should have a decision before week 1 of what's going to happen with Zeke Elliott. Now, you're going to have to it's so tough at this point for fantasy owners. And I'll break down a little bit of what the argument's going to be. Zeke is going to be trying to say that the girl is trying to ruin his career, and there's some text messages talking about how from the girl to her friend to lie to people about something, and there's all that evidence, and that's true. But there's also the physical evidence and the pictures of the injuries on the girl that is all consistent with domestic violence. So, I mean, it's a horrible thing, and I don't condone what he did, but I'm trying to help you as a fantasy owner. Now, if you want to take a hardline stand of this guy's a monster, he hits women, I don't want to have him on my team, you can do that. But purely fantasy-wise, if he plays, he's going to be a good player for you. He's going to be a great player for you. And in a dynasty league, he's probably still going to have a high draft pick just because of how old he is and what he's going to be for a long time to come, unless it comes out that this isn't the only incident or that he's going to have more incidents in the future. If this is the one isolated incident, going forward, I mean, Zeke Elliott should be fine to draft in most fantasy leagues. So my advice at this point, and I went back and forth with it on Twitter because during that day, I still threw out that if Zeke Elliott, he's probably going to appeal, and it will more than likely get reduced down to 4 or 5 games. And at that point, I still say that he's a top 5 pick in a lot of drafts. And I preface that by saying you're going to want to try and get Darren McFadden. And the thinking behind that is you saw a guy like Le'Veon Bell last year who he sat out the first 4 games, and he still finished as the number 3 back in fantasy football scoring-wise. And if you combine his points with his backup, D'Angelo Williams, who went off in the first couple weeks, he would have, if you combine both of those points, you have combined the number 1 running back in all of fantasy football last year. So if Zeke Elliott is looking at only a 4 or 5 game suspension, that line is good enough. Darren McFadden is good enough that if you can get, I would jump up a couple rounds as to where Darren McFadden would normally be going, which I think at this point he's going around the 9th or 10th round. I might jump up a round or 2, grab Darren McFadden, and I think Zeke Elliott is still, I still put him in the first round, and I know people are gonna go off on me as people went off on Twitter. They thought I was crazy. I'm not crazy, people. I'm giving you stats, and I'm going off the fact that I believe more than likely Zeke Elliott going to be looking at only 4 or 5 games. Now, if the appeal process comes through and he still has to serve a 6-game suspension, then that's a different story. At that point, then he starts dropping down in the rankings. I still, just because of the talent he has, I would put him somewhere around a 3rd round pick, a high 3rd round pick, and I wouldn't hate you if you went for a low 2nd round pick, just because of the value that he can bring you. And even though he's going to play half the season, if you get Darren McFadden and then Zeke Elliott comes back fresh, he finishes out that season and get into the playoffs, then you have Zeke Elliott for the playoffs. That's my thinking on Zeke Elliott. And when I go through the rankings, I do have him ranked much lower than where I would normally put him, and where I'm saying that you should draft him if he's going to be only suspended 4 or 5 games. But where I have him ranked right now is based on him getting a 6-game suspension. And with that, let's dive into my running back rankings for the 2017 fantasy football season. And the way it breaks out for me, I'm going to give you the top 20, and they broke out into about 5 different tiers. And I'll go over all of them, but let's start with the top tier, the 2 best running backs that are going to go more than likely in the top 5 picks in most drafts. And that's, I've already talked about them, David Johnson and LeVeon Bell. And I think you rank them accordingly. Now, all of last year, I questioned in the preseason of, is David Johnson able to do it? Can he go and really be a workhorse back for the Arizona Cardinals? I thought he was smoke and mirrors. Other people were telling me that he's the real deal. I was completely wrong on that. Stuff happens. I'm allowed to be wrong every now and then. So David Johnson, he tops my list this year. And I put that mainly because I think if it was an equal playing field for David Johnson and Le'Veon Bell, I would arguably give it to Le'Veon Bell. But because Bell is holding out, he's missing preseason, even though I think he's going to come in, he's going to be in peak physical shape, you can't reproduce going through preseason and getting game ready for NFL games. So I think David Johnson has an edge. Both of them are going to be really top backs. They're both going to be really good unless they have some sort of injury. But I think you can safely draft David Johnson, Le'Veon Bell somewhere in the top 5, and you're gonna have a workhorse back for you your entire season. So the next tier, they're a bit below the top 2, and it's another 2 running backs. And I got LeSean McCoy and Devonta Freeman. Now, these guys, they are probably going to go anywhere from the bottom part of the first round into the early part of the second round. And so with both of these guys, they have really high upside, but I think there's also some question marks about there. Starting with LeSean McCoy, I think on a Bills team, they're going to be running the ball a lot. He's also involved heavily in the passing game. But again, LeSean McCoy, he does have an injury track record. He's going to miss a game here or there. So you got to keep that in mind when you draft him. And you might have to pick up a running back earlier than you'd want. Say if you did have a higher pick and you draft David Johnson, Le'Veon Bell, you can maybe wait a couple more rounds to really get that running back too. But if you draft LeSean McCoy, I would definitely advise you to maybe go around earlier to get that second running back, or even go heavier running back in the draft, just in case you are going to be missing LeSean McCoy for a game or 2. And then Devonta Freeman, I talked about him last week, that he got his big contract extension, and that always worries me about anybody who goes out and gets a big money. Do they have the incentive to keep playing? And running backs these days, teams are just running through running backs, no pun intended. But Devonta Freeman, for all intents and purposes, should have another good year. Tevin Coleman behind him is really good. So if you do have Devonta Freeman, I think Tevin Coleman is one of those must-have handcuff running backs, because on some teams the backup, he's not going to produce as well as the number 1 guy. But as we've seen last year, if Devonta Freeman isn't working out, or if he's hurt, he has to miss a game, Tevin Coleman does have the ability to come in and be a workhorse back. He could give you high running back 2 points, even to low end running back 1. So that's my second tier running backs. Next year, you're probably looking at all second round guys, maybe leaking into the top part of the third round. I have Jordan Howard from Chicago, Melvin Gordon from the Chargers, and DeMarco Murray from Tennessee. All these guys, they're all going to be, barring injuries, they're going to be solid producers for you. So Jordan Howard in Chicago, that team's a bit of a mess. You're not sure what's going to happen. They brought in Mike Glennon, then they went out and traded away a bunch of picks to go and get Mitchell Trubisky, and you're not sure what's really going to happen. So they're really going to have to rely on Jordan Howard. So if teams do get wise to that and have to if they're going to defend it, they're going to be putting 8 guys in the box trying to defend Jordan Howard. Melvin Gordon, after a disappointing rookie season, really came back last year and had a bounce back year. And I really do believe this is a guy that he could just keep on improving. The Chargers seem to keep on adding weapons for Phillip Rivers to throw the ball to, and that's just going to take off pressure from Melvin Gordon. So I think he's going to be a really good pick. He's going to be a good running back 1 for a lot of people. And, DeMarco Murray, the only thing with him is that he has that incumbent running back, Derrick Henry, behind him. Last year I think people expected Henry to take a lot more reps from DeMarco Murray, but I think Murray really just proved that he was the better back at the moment. So DeMarco Murray should be pretty good, but I think that's why I put him in this third tier of running backs, because all the running backs going forward after this, they all have a bunch of question marks on them. Something could happen, and it'll drastically affect how they're going to perform for you as fantasy football players. So the fourth tier I got 6 different players in here, and all these guys have high potential, but also are high risk. So I have Jay Ajayi from the Dolphins, Marshawn Lynch from the Raiders, from the Raiders. I got Ezekiel Elliott coming in at number 10, and I'll explain a little bit more once I go into detail. Leonard Fournette at 11 from the Jaguars, Lamar Miller from the Texans, and Todd Gurley coming in at 13. Jay Ajayi really climbed up the boards this year. I think he actually got left off of the team roster early on in the season, and then he just had a huge end of the season. So you're going to have to draft him. He did have some issues with a concussion early on in preseason, but I think he's going to be good to go. And I see this guy going as high as the second round, but I feel most comfortable really any of these running backs anywhere in the third round. Now, if you feel a specific way about any of these type of players, I wouldn't kill you for drafting in the second round. What I'm just saying is that I feel most comfortable drafting these guys anywhere third round and down. So Marshawn Lynch, coming off a year of being retired, he's playing in his hometown, and I want to say that he's just going to be able to pick up and continue doing what he was doing when he was in Seattle before he was hurt. But that's the question, is can he do that? Now, the Raiders are an up-and-coming team. They got Derek Carr. They got Amari Cooper. They got Michael Crabtree there. They have a lot of weapons there. So it should be able to take away from some of the pressure and some of the focus that would be put on beast mode that defense would plan for him. But I still think teams are definitely going to try and stop him. He's in a difficult division, playing in the AFC West, having to play against the Broncos, the Chiefs, and the Chargers. It's going to be a tough year for him, but I still think he's going to be a low-end running back 1 and then a high-end running back 2. Zeke Elliott coming in, he still makes my top 10. And this is going based on solely that he is suspended for 6 games. If it comes back that the appeal comes through and he's only going to miss 4 or 5 games, he's definitely going to be moving up in this list. I would probably put him in that third tier with Jordan Howard, Gordon, Murray, and I'd probably even put him in the top of that. So I would move him immediately from 10th to 5th because he is that good. He is able to give you that much production. So, but as for right now, being suspended 6 games, he is only going to be playing less than half of the season for you because with the suspension as it is, they have their bye week on week 7. He's not coming back until week 8. So you have him for 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Most seasons end week 13 and go into playoffs. So you only have him for 6 games. So that's why he is so low at this point. Check back for the suspension appeal, and if it does get dropped down, he immediately moves up and really he should move up in any draft. Leonard Fournette, the big rookie coming out, playing for the Jaguars. He's been saying a lot of stuff out there that the NFL is just going to be easy. It's not going to be that easy. So I'd be very careful drafting him because he could be really good, but I think the Jaguars are a very, very, very bad team. And if teams are smart, they're going to know that they're going to have to run the ball a lot. So Leonard Fournette is going to be going up a lot of competition come September. So I still think he should produce. I see him as a running back 2 at this point. I'd be very careful if you're going to rely on him for anything more than a running back 2. If you're waiting on running backs and you draft Leonard Fournette as your number 1 running back, then I would advise in drafts, then you need to go running back after that. Get 2 more guys, because it's possible that Leonard Fournette may not do anything this season. He may have a bust of a season, but on the other hand, he could have a gigantic season. I put him at 11. Lamar Miller is a guy that I expected a lot from last year, and he started off pretty hot, but he definitely faded off towards the end of the season. And if you can, it's all going to depend on what that Houston offense is going to do. You know, Brock Osweiler was a big bust last year, and now it's a quarterback competition between Tom Savage and rookie sensation Deshaun Watson. A lot of people would love to see Deshaun Watson out there, and if I would venture to say that if Watson wins the quarterback battle, I think it's going to be really good for Lamar Miller, because if Tom Savage is out there, they're gonna, it's gonna help DeAndre Hopkins, because teams are gonna force the Texans to beat them through the air, because they can stop Lamar Miller. Lamar Miller is a good running back, but it seems that whenever he was just up against a team that was determined to stop the run, they were able to stop the run. So if Deshaun Watson can come out there, at least, even if he's not a great passer, he can at least create some moves with his legs, and he can move around a little bit. So, the read option is going to be huge, I think, in Houston if Watson ends up being the quarterback. So Lamar Miller, probably he's out right on the edge of being a running back 1, but he is a definite running back 2. And Todd Gurley, he's the last person in this 4th tier that I have, and this is a guy coming off a season who. He was in the talks for being one of the top 3 backs in the league, and it really showed what the Rams are doing. The Rams are a mess of a team. Now Todd Gurley, I do think he's going to have a bounce back season, and he could be one of those players where you get him a little bit later, and he ends up being one of the best players in fantasy this season. But it all really depends on how the Rams approach this season. So it'll be interesting to see. So then we get to the last tier, the 5th tier, rounding out the rest of my top 20. I got 7 guys. All these guys you could argue to be interchangeable. This is just the way that I have them ranked. I have Isaiah Crowell from Cleveland, Carlos Hyde from the 49ers, rookie Christian McCaffrey from Carolina, Ty Montgomery from Green Bay, Mark Ingram, New Orleans, Joe Mixon, another rookie from Cincinnati, and Spencer Ware from Kansas City. All these guys they could be really good, but then these are even more. There's more potential, more risk that they could just absolutely do nothing. And when you're trying to put together a team from week to week and to get players that will give you the most points and hopefully give you the best chance to win, these are guys, it's a toss-up, and that's why they're running back 2s. And some of these guys will probably be stretching to flex, just because you're not sure what running backs are how they're gonna produce throughout the season. So the guys that I would probably point out, there isn't much to say about Isaiah Crowell and Carlos Hyde. You kind of know what those guys are going to do. They're on bad teams, but they're still going to get the bulk of the load for those teams. Christian McCaffrey, I think has a little bit more value in PPR leagues, because even though they still have Jonathan Stewart, Jonathan Stewart's much older, and I think they want Christian McCaffrey to be the running back of the future. So you're going to see him featured a lot. I bump him up a little bit higher in PPR leagues, but I think 16 is a very good spot for him. I think he's a low-end running back 2 and a decent flex play in most weeks. Ty Montgomery I see him as very similar to Christian McCaffrey. He's making the transition more to running back from wide receiver, and we may see some teams, they have a year tape now on him at running back, so he may regress a little bit, and they got a rookie running back in Green Bay who might threaten to take some of those carries away from Ty Montgomery, because I think Ty he's gonna break down because he is a smaller wide receiver / running back, but he's still a decent option. Mark Ingram, there's so many running backs now in New Orleans. Not only do they have the rookie, the Alvin Kamara, they have arguably one of the best running backs of all time in Adrian Peterson. So there's going to be carries for all of those guys. And unless one of those guys really steps up and separates himself from the rest of the pack, it's going to be a running back by committee. I put Mark Ingram at the top because when healthy, he can produce the most. And, you never know. Maybe AP comes out and he's, the same AP of old, but I doubt that that's actually going to happen. I think they're still a passing team. Drew Brees is still there. He's going to pass the ball around. So after that, I got the rookie Joe Mixon. Again, he's in a running back by committee, but I think he has the inside track to be the starting running back in Cincinnati. But he's going to be fighting with Jeremy Hill. And then Gio Bernard, who just got a contract extension, he's going to be there for a while, and he's still going to be a part of the offense. So I will look for him to steal some carries and maybe even be there on passing downs. But I like the potential of Joe Mixon, and he could be a breakout player this year. And once you get to the 20th spot in the top 20 running backs, it's really a toss-up. And as I was looking at all the other guys that were left, I could have put my hometown Detroit Lions, Amir Abdullah or Theo Riddick up there, but I go with a guy who I think he really does have the potential to be a very good running back, and that's Spencer Ware. Spencer Ware, he can do it, but he needs to stay healthy. He's in a great offense to do it because Andy Reid loves to run the ball. So Spencer Ware, it's not going to be about not having enough touches. He's going to be able to touch the ball enough. And if he can stay healthy, Spencer Ware is another guy who could, by the end of the year, end up as a top 10 fantasy production running back. So to end this segment and end the show, I want to give you 3 guys who I think have upside and 3 guys that I want to list some concern of. For concern, I've already talked about it a little bit. Le'Veon Bell, Devante Freeman, and Zeke Elliott. Le'Veon Bell because coming off of if he's going to sit out this entire preseason, he's going to come in cold. Even though he can work out as much as he can, he's going to come in cold, and it worries me that you've seen in the past guys come in with no preseason, and they just immediately get injured. So that's my worry with him. Devonta Freeman, another case. He's got another good running back behind him in Tevin Coleman, and Devonta Freeman just got that money. So maybe he doesn't have as much incentive to really go out there and produce as much, even though the Falcons are more than likely going to want to get back to the Super Bowl just like they did last year. So they have another good team, but I do have that slight concern. And then Zeke Elliott, it's obvious. Is he gonna sit out 6 games? Is it gonna be 4 or 5? We don't know, and you're just gonna have to wait and see. If you have to draft now, I think you drop him down to the 3rd round. If it does get reduced to 4 or 5 games, I put him right back into the 2nd round. Maybe the lower tier of the 1st round. But it all depends on how many teams are in those leagues and what players are still available. The guys that I really like and who I think have upside, Todd Gurley, Joe Mixon, Spencer Ware. Todd Gurley, because we've now seen him for 2 seasons. One season was really, really good, and one season was really, really bad. And this is going to be, it's going to be the deciding factor of what's he going to do? Is he going to be able to go out there and produce and be a top fantasy running back, or is he going to go out there and be a product of his environment in LA and just be another middle of the road guy who might be on his way out in a couple years? Joe Mixon, running back, despite his off the field issues, I think he could be a really good running back in this league. And he's in a good offense in Cincinnati. Andy Dalton, AJ Green, they're giving him protection through the air, and Joe Mixon could come in there and just really produce. And then I just talked about Spencer Ware, a guy if he can stay healthy, he's in a system that runs the ball a lot. So that wraps up this episode of Fantasy Nerds. Next week I'll break down another position. I'll give you some more fantasy news. We're another week closer to real football. But until next week, I'm Jason Jarvi. Later, nerds.